remember some of you from last session. I remember Nupur, Sai Shri. Yeah. So last session, I just gave you a very brief introduction of what things will be like in the coming sessions, right? Like about the history of generally, I like to do at my first session is usually what is dance history, and like we also discussed how dance itself confers some sort of an evolutionary advantage over for communities, uh, and that was the bit. And then we most importantly discussed what is ancient, what is medieval and modern. But more than that, what is ancient about dance, what is medieval about dance, what is modern about dance. Am I right, Nupur and Saishri? I am just trying to recollect. So today I thought we will discuss. So the idea is for us to understand where Bharatanatyam came from and the journey Bharatanatyam has taken over the period of time. But also for me, before we go into the greater history of dance, I thought why not look at the immediate history, which is like when you just look back, Bharatanatyam has gone through a lot of political tension, a lot of change in the caste and community, erasure of a certain community, and so on. So we'll look at a bit of that today. And before, what dance was like, I think who performed it and what the social structure of dance was, I think is a very important discussion before we look at what dance was like itself. Okay. So I think the first session was pretty much that, and I have notes for that. I've just not yet given it to Nitya. I will put this set of notes and that together and send it across. So those who have missed last session, it's just a very brief discussion on uh, what are the different sources of history, how we've pieced history, dance history together, and then what is ancient, what is medieval, what is modern, what is ancient about dance, what is medieval about dance, and probably how responsibly we can take the discourse of dance history forward. This has been my over very brief introduction for the first session. So today I thought we'll look at who a Devadasi is, what was their social life, what was the social structure, right? And a little bit about the origins of the system is how I thought. And if we have time, I thought I'll also take you through a little bit of a film sequence that discusses uh, the Devadasi, but or we can do that a little later also. Okay. So the system of having female dancers, ritually dedicated dancers, has been there almost across India, right? The system of a Devadasi. But Devadasi essentially means different translations mean slave of God, wife of God. You know, there are various definitions, but servant of God. And there are some people say they're daughters of God, and so on. But who were these women? They were hereditary practitioners. They were ritually dedicated to a certain temple, right? And as ritually dedicated for a certain temple's service. And the service they offered towards the temple was in the form of music and dance. Are we okay? So this was essentially their job. Okay. However, before we progress in today's session, maybe I already told you this last class. The word Devadasi is itself today politically incorrect. We will not use this word outside this class, which is also why I was telling Nitya that, don't keep the videos available for too long. Primarily being colonial literature and in the time of British and the upper caste Indian men, what we did was we confused the term Devadasi with a larger umbrella of everything that was, all women. We must understand that Devadasi was used as an umbrella term for all women, which included prostitutes. Okay, so when you put all women under this umbrella, what happened is there was a certain bad tag and association with the dancing women and with the dance form itself, right? So people from within the community with, uh, do not wish to be associated with this term because there is no nuance in this term, Devadasi, right? So it is currently politically incorrect, and ideally, outside of this classroom, you should use the term hereditary practitioners or hereditary singer-dancer community or Isai Vellalar community. Okay. But for convenience, I will use the term Devadasi only because most literature uses this term, and it's just easier to understand. And I'm so used to this term, and it's a convenient term. Most scholars have also used this term. This political correctness and nuance is a very recent thing. All right. But the practice, so essentially, they were during even the Tamil rule, Chola rule, they were known as Devadasi or Devaradiyar. And the other thing that the putting all the Devadasis under an umbrella, the other nuance that got missed was every Devadasi was also different, right? There were Alankara Dasis, there were Raja Dasis, there were different, there was a hierarchy even within them. You know, there was a Devadasi for the main shrine, there was a Devadasi for a sub shrine, there was a Devadasi who will only put Rangoli, there was a Devadasi who will only make prasadam. Okay, so Devadasis were not all dancers, but all dancers were Devadasis. You get it? So because in a temple system, there were women recruited to do different kinds of jobs, not just music and dance, right? And this is a very interesting study by a scholar called Leslie Orr, who studied the Chola time Devadasis. Why I like to mention this work is because when we talk about Devadasis, the first thing we think of is to glorify the Chola rule, and we say that I hope all of you are aware that the Tanjavur has the big temple or the Brihadishwara temple, which is in many ways an epicenter of music and dance for the form that we follow, right? Like it's the center. So that temple. It is believed that there were 400 women that were brought into that temple, right? So it's a very interesting study of inscriptions that this scholar did. And she said not all out of the 400, she says 3 or 4 were listed as dancers. But generally as dancers, we like to believe that all 400 were dancers. Okay, because they were Devadasis. She actually studies Chola inscriptions across Tamil Nadu, and she says very few were dancers. In fact, they were Devadasis, and her book's title is Donors, Devotees of God. Okay, there is very little mention of dancers. And that Devadasi women were donors of temples also. They built temples. Okay, so it was not that they were only dancers, and that because we like to believe as we are dancers, we like to believe that they were all dancers, they were all great dancers, and every temple had so many dancers. That is not true. All right. These were women who were ritually dedicated to temple service. That's all. And out of that, one section provided the service of music and dance. And even within that, I think there was a lot of specialization, right? Some people did some kinds of dancing, some people did some other kinds of dancing. And this is also, we see from historical records, when you see names listed with Devadasis, we see that, this one was specialized in this kind of dancing. All right. So that is another nuance that colonial literature has missed, right? And another important thing that, another nuance that this misses is that people from within the Devadasi community earlier have believed that they were not essentially a caste, but it was a way of life. It was a vritti or a murai. Murai as in vritti as a way of life, right? What is the difference? The Devadasi could be recruited from a pool of certain castes. They could be from the Melakarar community, they could be from the Nayanakarar community, they could be from a bunch of communities, they could be recruited. But once they were recruited, what identified them was not by their caste, but by the way of life, right? And that is what was unique to the Devadasi system, right? Hold on to these thoughts. And most importantly, you should again understand that by putting all the Devadasis under an umbrella term, we've also erased the diversity, right? For all practical purposes, things we talk in this class are all the references we get from the Tanjavur region. That doesn't mean Karnataka didn't have Devadasis, Andhra Pradesh didn't have Devadasis. It is just that Tanjavur is very well studied. Tanjavur history is very well preserved, right? The kings of Tanjavur were like extensive patrons of the arts. We will see this over and over again when we look at the Maratha history, Nayaka history, Chola history, and their connections to dance. And the most recent and the form of Bharatanatyam that all of us currently practice has its origins from Tanjavur. That it doesn't mean Tanjavur gave birth to Bharatanatyam, but the form that we dance today is more closely related to Tanjavur. Are you all like on the same page with me? It may feel like these are loosely connected thoughts, but at the end of the class, you'll find like you'll be able to make sense of all of this. Now, why I'm talking about this Tanjavur example is just as in Indian families, every household has its own rituals, every household has its own way of doing things. Every wedding ceremony, even within the same community, even within the same caste, every family will have a certain way of making a sambar. Every family will have a certain way of executing a ritual, right? So every temple's ritual, every temple's processes, every temple's dances were different. All right. So that also distinguished every Devadasi, right? So whatever I say in terms of their social life, in terms of their sexuality, as much as I would like to believe and you would like to believe that it was the norm, it probably wasn't. Okay. Mostly we are referring to Tanjavur, sometimes Tiruttani, and it varied also from time period to time period. It is not because with every kingdom, with every with the new governance, the setup, the organizational structure of a temple changes. And with the organization of a structure of a temple changing, then the way the Devadasi community is laid out will also change. All right. So there is really, at the end of, like, if you spend a reasonable amount of time with me learning history, discussing history, the only thing that will stick to you really will be that there is no rule to all of this. It's very fluid, right? And it's primarily because family to family things changes, temple to temple things change, right? When I say it is a vritti, murai, and it is not essentially a caste, but it also, you need to understand that they were probably recruited only from a few castes. Like a Brahmin woman wouldn't become a Devadasi, or a lower caste woman would also not become a Devadasi. Okay, Devadasi was actually some sort of a middle upper caste. Okay, but what happened is only post revival and reform, post reform of the community and post 1930s is when they got integrated into a certain caste. Up until 1930s, they were not identified as a certain caste. All right, and that the movement that led to them becoming a certain caste is called the reform movement. All right, and this is the movement that sort of reformed the system of Devadasis. It probably also erased the system of Devadasis. It not just reformed, it's erasure. But simultaneously, a parallel movement that happened. But what also happened with the reformation and of the Devadasis was the erasure not just of the community, but of the dance. Right? So parallelly, there was a certain movement to revive the dance, to sustain the dance, and that is called the revival movement. So these two are some sort of parallel and opposing forces. which happened in the 1920s, started in the 1920s and sort of took, it, it happened very fiercely in the 1930s, and by 40s, probably the community was erased and the dance form of what is modern Bharatanatyam was consolidated and reformulated, right? So that is the revival movement. These are two parallel but sort of opposing movements also,
Sorry,
right? Yeah, had in mind. Yeah. Right.
I think I missed. So the two movements were the reform and the revival?
Yeah.
Okay.
This
So,
is it's popularly known as reform and revival in scholarly terms. Yeah.
okay. For a second, I got confused with the anti-Notch movement, so I just wanted to confirm.
Yeah. So the reform is the anti-notch movement.
Oh, okay. Okay. There we go.
So the
Okay.
reform is the anti-notch movement. I think it's just the scholars just like the nice alliteration of reform and revival
Okay.
because it's parallel movements to describe. You can't discuss reform without revival. You can't discuss revival without the reform. So I think it's just a give the nice zing to it. That's all. It's the same. Okay, it is the anti-notch movement that started in the 1920s. It's also called the anti-notch movement, right? But these two sort of happened parallelly. Okay, and they're two different movements in some ways. They informed each other. They worked in parallel, but they're different.
Maha,
Okay.
can I ask a quick question
Yeah,
here?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure.
So I know we are dealing primarily with Tanjavur and Bharatnatyam, but was there anything similar that happened also across India in the other dance forms? Can you just briefly touch upon that and then
So I think it happened across. Okay. Also, by at least as much as Tamil Nadu, the Devadasis were still actually dancing more. If you look up in the north in the Tavaif community or even in the Kalavantalu community, women were extensively actually prostitutes there, right? But these for up in the north, and it happened a little later. It was in, for example, I think in Andhra, the Devadasi Act finally it came out in 1956, I think, right? Tamil Nadu, the Madras Devadasi Abolition Act came in 1947. It was in parallel with the independence for us, Tamil Nadu. So it happened across, but the most powerful movement, I think, Nitya, is the Madras Devadasi Abolition Act, which actually had which extended its influence across the country.
oh wow, okay.
Okay,
Did not know.
this is easily the most important act. While it happened across the country also, but because Rukmini Devi Arundel, because Muthulakshmi Reddy's power, and because E. Krishna Iyer, because the reformists and the revivalists held such influence across India. They had like all of them were political figures, right? So
Right.
what happened in Tamil Nadu extended like a really important influence across the country. Or also I would like to believe because I'm just going a little off tangent, but it's I think sort of important here because if you the first four classical dance forms if we see that were identified to be classical is Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, Manipuri, and Odissi, I think. Okay. And Kuchipudi, other forms were added much later. Okay. They were added one after the other. Why is this important? Is all the other forms, including Odissi, followed the prototype of Bharatanatyam. Kuchipudi also was not a solo Bharatanatyam form, solo Margam form or solo art like Bharatanatyam, right? Odissi also was not was a loosely available form which was reconstructed, and all of these forms also emulated Bharatanatyam for its reconstruction. All right, and this is a very interesting thought. Why is this related? Because Bharatanatyam and its reformists and its revivalists extended that kind of an influence across the country. Okay, Kuchipudi did not have a Margam or like a solo format till then. Odissi also was first called Jayantika or something. No. Yeah, Odissi was the word used to describe Odisha's music and not dance. And the first few Odissi gurus came and trained in Kalakshetra to learn how Kalakshetra is doing Bharatanatyam, the pedagogy, and they went back to Odisha structured Odissi based on this. Okay, I'm going slightly off topic, but this is because Nitya asked, were there parallel movements across the country? So all other forms, and I would like to believe that Bharatanatyam's influence is so important for classical dance, not just like across India. It's not just a very, and that is why Bharatanatyam is very global also. Bharatanatyam was the form that first traveled across the world. Bharatanatyam was the first form that had a pedagogy, if you think about it, right? So, and again, this is something probably I will only say in this class. I will not say it outside easily but I'm very proud of how, as much as there is erasure and we need to acknowledge and all of that, but how the revival of Bharatanatyam exerted an influence across the country is mind-blowing to think about it, because no other form like had its, like, everybody sort of emulated Bharatanatyam. I won't say copied, but Bharatanatyam inspired that kind of thing. All right. And again, now that goes back, the roots go back to Tanjavur for all of this. Now I'll connect it to back to where we started. This goes back to Tanjavur because Tanjavur exerted that kind of an influence, because Bharatanatyam also was systemized very early by the Tanjavur quartet, by the kings. Okay, as even though it was called Sadir and all of that, it had a loose form and a system. It did not exist as loosely like repertoires here and there. The Sadir form or the precursor form of Bharatanatyam already had some structure. So when the revivalists took it over, they had a very good base to work with. Whereas Odissi practitioners or Kuchipudi practitioners didn't have something like that already. They pieced whatever they had together. They pieced together with even temple sculptures, in case of Odissi. And then they come down to Kalakshetra, learn Bharatanatyam to absorb its pedagogy. Okay, so, but for us, we lucked out in the fact that Bharatanatyam already in Tanjavur had a system in place. There were texts already written in place. There was already a pedagogy in place. Tanjavur quartet already devised what a margam is. Although that margam is very different from what we do today, but we had what a margam meant with us, right? So that richness of Tanjavur is probably why even like all the discussions around Devadasis, Tanjavur serves as a good example. Also, most importantly, I think Tanjavur, the kings always had the they had the intelligence of maintaining good records. See, Madurai also had Devadasis. Jinji, Nayaka courts also had Devadasis. They were dancing women and the practice of dance across. But Tanjavur has an uninterrupted record, be it in inscriptions, be it in terms of biographies, be it in terms of court records, right? So that the region, that is also why we keep going back to Tanjavur. It is not just the richness of the art, it's not just the patronage of the art, not just the Devadasis who lived there, but also record keeping, right? If that is not there, I don't think any of these conversations, any of our dance forms would exist, right? Okay, so I think that gave us a good introduction, or I hope so. And so we'll go back to the Devadasi itself, right? So the solo variant that was practiced by the Devadasis during the Nayaka and the Maratha period was loosely termed as Sadir. Again, there were variations. Some people called it Chaduru, Sadir, Kelika, Natyamu, Chinnamedam. So for anything I say, there will be exceptions, because region to region, temple to temple, this would have varied. So the Devadasi women practiced a solo variant of an art form called Sadir. All right. And this is again very important for us to understand. Bharatanatyam, Sadir did not become Bharatanatyam. Sadir was reformulated with other elements into Bharatanatyam. It does not mean Sadir is just a precursor. This was first this, then it was Sadir, then it was Bharatanatyam. No. All right. Sadir is a solo form essentially, and Sadir included a mixed bag of so many different things, and a solo variant of called Sadir became Bharatanatyam. And this variant was practiced in the temples and courts by ritually dedicated women called the Devadasis. Another important thing to understand is, at least from the Nayaka period, the court and the temple were given the same preference. All right. What does that mean? The king was as important as the gods. Okay, so which is also why in Bharatanatyam you will see a lot of compositions in praise of kings, not just gods, right? Because you always needed patronage, right? Patronage is everything, right? So even today, I'm sure in the US there are government grants. Even in India, even if all of us complain that government funding is not enough, if not for even this little funding, we will not be able to sustain, right? If not for the recognition given by governments for the arts, we will not be able to sustain, right? So kings and artists realized this very early. So they often tried to appease the kings by writing in praise of them, right? So kings were almost equal to gods. That is one thing. And the other important understanding here is, it is not that Devadasis first danced in temples and then the system moved to the courts. They existed sort of in parallel. All right. It's not like an evolution. All right. In fact, if you go back in time, before temple building, dance was for the chieftains, for the local kings only. In the time of the Sangam era, in time when there was no organized temple worship, what happened is you had a chieftain and dancers were nomadic dancers. They sang in praise of kings. They sang about victory of their king. They sang in praise of their local gods. They traveled from region to region. And this system of before the Devadasi, these dancers, these nomadic tribes were known as Virali or Padini. Right? They were male and female dancers. But with what is known in India as the Bhakti movement, with organized temple worship, we started an organized system of recruiting dancers. Is that okay? So this Bhakti movement happened in the early medieval era. All right. And it started in the south. Okay. And that's also.
Can I ask a quick question about
Yeah.
the time period? So I know you mentioned the Sangam period, which is something I've heard of, but can you chronologically put these periods so we can understand what comes first
Okay.
and stuff?
So see, I don't. So a Sangam period is a good 2000 years ago. Okay. So I think up until third, fourth, second century AD will be considered Sangam, if I'm not wrong. The ancient period is Sangam. All right. Early medieval period is when organized temple worship, the roots of organized temple worship start, which is with saints and your saints traveling from sthalam to sthalam, kshetram to kshetram, or holy site to holy site, singing in praise of God, congregating people, and starting a semblance of worship in that region, right? With that, what happens is you start, one is a temple building starts, and temple slowly becomes not just a site of religion, but also a site of economy, right? Even today, if you go to India, there is so much economy around a temple. There is an accountant in a temple. There is someone selling flowers outside a temple. There are so many jobs around a temple, right? And a temple was one of the most important sites of economic activity back in the day. And that begins in the early medieval period. By late medieval period, and especially in the region of Tanjavur, temples were not just built, but temples were built in large scale, and temples were expanded, and the rituals also expanded. Okay, so it is not like just because India has a great history of having Vedas and rituals, it doesn't mean like It always existed. It was formulated, and it was formulated and systems were put in place. Rituals are also like systems in place, right? It's like as much as, so every it is a temple. If you look at temple as an organization, ritual is there's a system, and the Tiruvarur system is different from the Tanjavur's temple, is different from Kapalishwar temple in Chennai. Each of these, and these systems were all put in place in late medieval period, right? So what shastras, how do you, how Agama Shastras were put in place? And in the late medieval period, we were influenced by Sanskritic cultures. Till then, everything was like more like a local cult, local beliefs. But from the medieval, later parts of the medieval period, we absorbed Sanskritic culture, integrated them with our local cultures, right? So, and Tanjavur really expanded its temples, and and temples were also a sign of victory, right? So when the kings, it was a sign of prosperity of the kingdom, victory, right? So when temples started expanding, more dancers, more devadasis, more ritual specialists of dance were recruited, right? So what made this woman special? This woman was special because she was married to God. Traditionally, in a Hindu family, a woman is identified as a sumangali when she is married and her husband is alive, right? For a woman who's married to God, there is no possibility of her husband dying. So she was a nitya sumangali, always sumangali, right? And a sumangali woman in general is considered associated with all things auspicious. So, so you can imagine a nitya sumangali is an ever auspicious woman, right? This nitya sumangali term is more seen in the south, in Tamil Nadu region. But if you also see in Odisha, you will see terms such as Chalanti Devi, where the Devadasi woman was called Walking Lakshmi, Walking Devi, right? So they were across the country associated with some forms of auspiciousness, right? Again, if you ask me, do we have evidences for this in the north? Not really, we don't. I'm sure they existed, but then by the time that we are talking about, the timeline that we are talking about, there was a more strong Mughal and Muslim influence in the northern part of India, right? So this temple worship and temple recruitment, we don't have evidences. It doesn't mean they didn't exist. They would have existed, but we don't know in what forms they exist, right? But in Odisha, yes, we see. In Maharashtra, we see. In Karnataka, we see. Okay. They were known as In fact, in Rajasthan, there are apparently 9th century inscriptions which say Ganika. There is the term Ganika in Rajasthan also, right? But other parts of the north, we don't see this as much. Okay. We don't have an evidence as much. All right. So this woman was ritually married to God. So she was ritually married to God in an almost upper caste ceremony, right? Why am I saying this? For you to understand that the Devadasi was also proud of her caste location. Okay. Today, because from our perspective, we often look at it as they are marginalized women. Today they are marginalized, but they were actually held a position of power and prestige. And even the marriage ceremony and the rituals they followed for marrying God was replicating like an upper caste ceremony. Is that okay? All right. So, and they held a lot of power. Okay. So, what kind of power? One is the act of doing a ritual itself is a very powerful act, right? Think about it. Today, even now, you look at the priest in a temple with a certain respect, a certain, it is something only they can do, right? You and me can't, it's not a job you and me can easily replace, right? So the Devadasi had that kind of a power, right? They had specific ritual implements like the Arati, right? Taking a Kumbha Harati, taking an Arati was exclusive to the Devadasi. And even now you can see this in British paintings, right? The East India Company paintings. where the Devadasi woman is doing an arati. And arati was an exclusive right of the Devadasi, right? And there are also evidences where the Devadasi does something called a kai katum murai. Okay, kai hand, katum to show, murai way. So they had a way of showing hands, which meant that apparently, I've read this, that the priest is doing the puja inside the shrine, and then there is an audience, there are the devotees outside, and the Devadasis are translating that for the audience. They're showing because oftentimes even you and me don't understand what the priest is doing. So the Devadasi was that channel which helped the audience, the devotees understand what was happening, right? And they had us also, they were so powerful, and it was believed that even looking at the Devadasi, touching her, was not permitted. It was an offense. It was a punishable offense in some kingdoms, right? So again, why should you understand this? Is that they were not loose women, as you would see, right? They were sexually free. They were not married. They were married to God, right? They were allowed to choose one rich patron who would help them sustain their dance. They would help them sustain their training in dance. But it didn't mean they were loose women. They were not prostitutes, right? It's a very subtle difference, but it's very important. And this is a very funny statement I read somewhere that I thought I'll just apparently, okay, I'll come to the statement later. So who was this patron? So they could choose one rich man in the society who would with whom they would procreate, they would have their child, because procreation was important for them to sustain and to donate a child to the temple, or to sustain temple service, because temple service was very important and that was what sustained their families, right? So they chose one rich patron who's usually an upper caste, not from a lower caste, not a different religion, right? They chose this one man. They did not owe this man any domestic service. What does that mean? She would only have her child with them, and that man would provide for her. He would provide for her training in dance. He would provide for her dance expense. But she, in return, did not have to serve him. She did not have to cook for him, wash his clothes. She did not have to adopt a grihastha life like a normal woman. For that, he had another wife, right? It's a complicated arrangement. It is not black and white, but this was, and in many cases, this arrangement was very expensive for that man. Okay, okay. Why don't we record? Okay, sure. So she had this relationship with this one man, right? In many cases, the Devadasi, but they were not really the bad women, or they were not really the loose women as people would like to label them often. All right. So this was a very complicated arrangement. It is not black and white. But what is important for us to understand is the social status they held. One is, like I already told you, they had a ritual purpose, but they also had secular roles. What are these secular roles? Because they were auspicious women, they had roles that they had in other, like, wedding ceremony. In a wedding ceremony, the tali would be tied. The beads of the tali would be tied by the Devadasi woman, right? They had a role of, they would even take part in ceremonies of ear piercing, of cradle ceremonies. They had secular functions, right? And they would take part in like wedding singing, like singing for a wedding, right? So what did this mean? Their auspiciousness, they carried with them their auspiciousness wherever they went. And this repertoire they carried varied from temple to court to secular functions also, right? So somebody asked me recently, so what is the difference between Sadir and Bharatanatyam? The difference between Sadir and Bharatanatyam is not just in who danced or what they danced, but in the context of dance. Bharatanatyam is a modern reformulated dance for the stage, which bears semblances of the ancient forms. Yes, but that said, the form of dance that we practice has a different context from the southern form. All right, it's very interesting also because the secular functions, in fact, apparently they had specific fun songs called joke parties, joke songs. They had very specific songs for specific occasions, right? In fact, today if you go to a wedding unjal, you would sing any Carnatic song, right? But I mean, of course, there are wedding songs, but generally today, because we've lost that repertoire of knowing what a Carnatic song is also, or what the wedding song is also, we sing anything, because we think music itself is a celebration, which is also fair. But there was a specific repertoire for each of them. Okay. And the status they held, they lived in the best streets, right? When you talk about the Chola time Devadasi women, you see that they were in the Tanjavur temple inscriptions. They list the name of the 400 women that were associated with the temple with the streets in which they lived. So they lived in the best streets, which is usually around the temple, which is like the prime locality, right? And around them, around the best streets, these women were called the Talicheri Pendagal also. That is the women who lived in the best streets, right? And they were given tax-free lands. What does that mean? The temple gave them a piece of land. They could use it, they could lease it out, they could do agriculture, right? And the profits were not taxed, and the Devadasis could hold on to it wholly, right? This is again what you should understand is, so these were the only working women in the past. These were the only earning women in the past, right? And this was a very special status for these women. And that is why they were not dependent on the patron for money. Okay. So this was a very specific arrangement only for the women. And now you should also understand that Tamil ritual worship in a temple setup had two setups called the Chinna Melam and the Periya Melam. All right. Chinna Melam as in small orchestra, Periya Melam as in big orchestra. Right. It's all there in the notes. Okay. It's just right in front of me. I'm going to give it. You don't have to essentially write it down. Chinna Melam is the team of the dancer, her Nattuvanar, her singer, and her team. Periya Melam is the Nadaswaram and group. Even today, even I'm sure in the US, you will see some here and there temples having Nadaswaram. Have you seen? I'm sure there is, right? The long pipe-like instrument. Have you seen it? Okay. The Periya Melam and Chinna Melam were both ritual operations of a temple, and operations of a temple. But the Periya Melam was exclusively male and Chinna Melam was female, which meant the inheritance was male, inheritance was female. In the Chinna Melam community, for the dancer, the Nattuvanar, the musicians were male, but the dancers were exclusively female. But the Periya Melam community, it was all male. But the inheritance, on the other hand, in the Chinna Melam community was exclusively female. And the Nattuvanar, the musicians, were paid by the dancer. Not paid, but also recruited. Even today, we are paying our teachers. That's different, right? But they were recruited. Today, we wouldn't use that word. We are not recruiting our teacher, right? But they were recruited. A teacher was almost recruited. So even then, you will see that the woman held a lot of power, right? And they lived in large matriarchal households, right? And the oldest woman or the grandmother was called the Thai Kiravi, and she held the most power, right? Thai Kiravi, as in and she held a lot of power. She decided the finances. She decided who will the patron be. She decided when the girl is ready to be dedicated to the temple. She had control over the young girls' dance and her training and much more, right? And now that they got tax-free lands, it was very important for them to continually contribute a dancer to the temple. Otherwise, they will lose hold of this land, right? And so you will also understand there was a lot of tension between the Periyamelam community and the Chinnamelam, because the Chinnamelam was a richer community. Though both were recruited by the temple, the woman was making more money. Okay, hold on to this thought, because the reform movement was almost initiated by the Periyamelam community. They all belong to the same caste, but tensions of property, tensions of money is all within the community is also what led to the anti-North agitation. It is not just social reform, but it was also a lot of political tension within the community, and the politics of the male and female dynamics and who inherited money also led to the reform, right? Often when we talk about reform, we talk only that the British axed it or the colonial eye axed it. But this underlying tone that things within the community led to political tensions is something that's not spoken about, right? So I'll just go back to summarize the social honors given to the Devadasi. They lived in the best street. They were given tax-free lands. They were given jewelry, right? Gods observed, gods mourned during their death. What did this mean? Back in the day or even today, you will not see a corpse, a dead body passing by a temple. But the Devadasi's corpse was kept outside the temple. The garland and the sandalwood paste that was on the god is given to the Devadasi. So such was the honor given to the Devadasi. In some cases, there are stories of how prasadam for that day, the food given to God that day was bitter god when the Devadasi died, right? So the god and the Devadasi, or the Devadasi, shared such an intimate relationship with the temple, and she was such an indispensable part of the temple. This honor was not even given to the priest, right? And when you look at even tantric literature, or even like again going back to Odisha, this woman, the power a woman held was always such, the auspiciousness of a woman, and then the auspiciousness of a woman married to God, Nitya Sumangali. So these were the most important women. But that said, they had this whole complicated way of life where they were not allowed to marry or lead a grihastha life. They chose a patron and had children through the patron, right? While on one hand, they had a hereditary right to temple service, which means if I have served a temple, my daughter has a hereditary right to the temple service. In some cases, we also see that there was a need to prove your skill in contributing service to the temple. It was not always mere hereditary right. In some cases, there was an application process. There was a Geje Puja or a Salanga Puja where they showed off their skill, after which they were chosen or not to be ritually dedicated. We see that evidence also. Because many times they say that it's only a hereditary right. For everything we say, there is an exception to it also. All right. So there was a hereditary component to this, and there was a technical skill component to this also, right? And
How old were they? Like when this would happen? Is there any record of that?
yes, there is. So this is again so see, in India back in the day there was child marriage, right? So girls were often ritually dedicated even before their puberty. But after their puberty so girls were often had their arangetram salanga puja sort of thing, or announced that they were dancers before their puberty, and on the day of their puberty they would be ritually dedicated also. So this child marriage concept, like 12, 13, 14, you did, yeah. So this has always been there.
And did
Okay.
they have a choice? Like you mentioned, right? So it's not just hereditary, but were they given a choice as in like were the the girls that were showing interest the ones recruited, or
Yes.
is there any knowledge
This
around
is
that?
the problem in our understanding. They did not have choice.
I see.
So, see, and when we talk about the past of Bharatanatyam, there are two narratives. One is either you talk only social injustice or you only glorify this as cultural heritage. The gray area in between, that cultural heritage also did social injustice, that these two lived parallelly, and that this gray area is is the reality for me, right? Because there is one school of thought that talks only social injustice, which is valid. But what happened is, because of the reform movement, because of the political tensions and the anti-Notch movements that take place from the 1920s, what happens is you lose, uh, you are, when you remove the community, you're removing the art also, right? What happened after is you pieced the art together, right? You lost a lot of the art also because of the revival, right? So that, while that is a reality, you should also talk about how women might have been vulnerable, how these women did not have choice, right? uh, they were often pushed to earning for the family very early in life, right? This is also a reality, and this is also a part of history that we should speak about, as much as we like to glorify the past. So, in at least in India, when you talk history, there are these two schools of thought. One, we're talking only erasure of dance and not the injustice that happened to community. We're talking only erasure of the cultural heritage, or we're talking only social injustice that happened. That, but these two should also be parallelly thought about. I don't know if there is a way to reconcile these two things. I am not a scholar, but my goal through all of these discussions is that these two things sort of existed, and there is no black or white to this, right? And the other most important thing for us to understand is it varied from temple to temple, varied from kingdom to kingdom. There might have been one kingdom where there was more injustice than another, right? There might have, because if you look at the anti-Notch movement in the 1920s, there were Devadasi women who wrote uh, against the anti-Notch movement, who said, listen, we are happy doing this. We want this. By anti-Notch, yeah, I'm coming to you. By passing the Devadasi abolition bill, you are axing our right to live. You're axing away our right to earn, right? So that reality also existed. So there is all of this. Yeah, Chinmay. Yeah.
Sorry, actually, that was kind of my point. Is that our question is that the reform movement and the Devdasi abolishment bill, it's very nuanced because I think the bill was passed to outlaw prostitution. That was, I think, the intent of the bill is and protect the Devadasis. But then the reputation of them being prostitute wasn't that from the reform movement, which, if I remember correctly, was a smear campaign
The thing
against
is,
Devadasis to reduce their power.
yeah. So see, I'll tell you what the reform movement. It was a smear campaign in some sense. Uh, the but the Devadasi Abolition Act not just, it prevented ritual dedication, and it not just prevented ritual dedication. I think the nuance the Devadasi Abolition Act might have missed is it prevented any sort of temple dancing. It was only much later that even your Natyanjalis, like today we have Chidambaram Natyanjali, you have your Shivaratri temple performances, they were all sort of revived only in the 60s and 70s. Till then, any sort of temple dancing was prohibited. Forget, right? So the Devadasi Abolition Act not just uh, removed the system of the Devadasis, not just removed ritual dedication of the Devadasis, it also removed dancing in temples itself, which meant dancing in temples by anybody. So dancing in temples was sort of reconstructed. Dancing in temples today is a performance, of course. It's not a ritual, but it was sort of revived and brought back in later.
What was the justification for this very blanket bill?
See, there is no, you can't, again, uh, there is no justification. And I think the other narrative that today what we like to do is we like to also blame the reformists, we like to blame the revivalists also. But I think there is another nuance we are missing here. Everybody is a product of their times, right? This is 1930s and 40s. India is fighting for its freedom, right? India is a new country fighting for its identity, right? We are heavily influenced by what the world is thinking of us, right? The English educated elite in India, right? We want to be the West in some sense, right? We want to bring in Western forms of justice. We want to bring equality. We want to bring in all of that. Also, think of it from that light also. It is not black and white. It's very easy for us to sit here today and say Rukmini Devi did a smear campaign against Devadasi women. It's very easy to say it. And Rukmini Devi Arundale has not been kind to the Devadasis also. When I read the newspaper articles from 30s and 40s, some of the things she has said, but it is politically incorrect with the nuance I know in 2026. Right? It is not, everybody is a product of their times. And dance was used as a tool for India's cultural heritage and in India's freedom struggle and nationalistic identity. Dance and especially Bharatanatyam has played a very important role. And for that, any stray element they wanted to remove. And this was some sort of a byproduct of unintended consequence. Unintended and probably unintentional also, or not just I wouldn't say unintentional, but because of lack of awareness or lack of this political nuance that you and me carry today. It's very easy for us because again, I'm talking to you about this because today, if you go to social media, there are only two camps. There is one camp that's a smear campaign against the Devadasis, another camp that's a smear campaign against Rukmini Devi Arundale. Right? But if Rukmini Devi Arundale had not done that, you and me wouldn't be practicing dance today. Dance would not have the pedagogy it has today. Right? Think of it from that light. I don't have answers. You will also not have answers. Right? I think, but it's very important for you to play devil's advocate when one camp says something. You should also say, but also this. Somebody else raised hands. Okay. Because also, it's again it's very easy to blame the upper castes for erasing the Devadasi community. But the most important movement that happened in the reform movement was what is called the self-respect movement, which was initiated from within the community by the men, selfishly for the property rights. Their intention was not clean also. No, their intention was not self-respect alone. They wanted rights hold over the property. Right? So this is a very complicated, there are multiple forces. There is the British, there is upper caste Indian men, right? There is men from within the community, right? And there is the struggle for India's freedom. Now, when you see in all of this, you will understand it's a very complicated process. You will not be able to put it as black and white. Right? Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. If I'll just quickly summarize because I keep straying away, coming back. I hope you were able to sort of make sense of what I wanted to say. So, Bharatanatyam, as we practice today, is a reformulated art form that has its roots loosely connected to Tanjavur, right? And for all practical purposes, whatever we talk about in dance history is usually from Tanjore, right? So in Tanjore region and even other parts of India, there was a practice of ritually dedicated dancer and dancing women who were dedicated to temple. And these women were loosely known as the Devadasi women, right? And the name the Devadasi women carried different names from region to region. They were Adiyal in Tamil Nadu, Kalavantulu in Andhra, Vilasini, Ganika, Bhogambaru, Sanivaru, so many different names. Kalavant in Maharashtra, Mahari in Odisha, and so on. So every place has different names by which they were known. But what was their role? They were ritually dedicated to do music and dance. What did they get in return? They got tax-free lands. They got paid by in terms of jewelry. They were usually their expenses were taken care of by a rich patron, and they were ritually married to God, and hence they were called the Nitya Sumangali, right? They were ever auspicious. What does ever auspicious mean? They were never widowed, right? They always carried a sign of auspiciousness with them. It's even believed that like people would go to Devadasi women saying, "I'm having a headache. Can you just apply sandalwood to me?" They were just considered very powerful and auspicious, and women who were able to bring good things to the society, right? And as far as dance is concerned, they danced for the temple, right? So what did they do? They did Kumbha Haratis. Your Pushpanjali, for example, is a temple repertoire. We have all probably learned a Pushpanjali by now, right? But Pushpanjali has its roots to a temple, right? Because also another thing probably I missed telling you is your tatakarams, right? Your ta, rita, jam, tata, rita, jam, tajam, takajam. These solukattas were considered auspicious. They were considered like mantras, right? So, like you would chant a mantra in a temple, your tatakarams were performed for in temples. So, your pushpanjalis were danced as a ritual in temple. Kautuvams were danced as a ritual in temple. Okay. When we look at specific repertoire, I will show you some kautuvams performed in temple. All right. So these women performed in temples. They also did the haratis. So this group of dancers, ritually dedicated to temple, along with their nattuvanar, along with their musicians, were called the Chinna Melam, or the small orchestra. Right. The bigger team, which was called the Periya Melam, was the Nadaswaram Tabla team. Right. The Chinna Melam was an exclusively matriarchal household, and the Periya Melam was an exclusively patriarchal household, although they belonged to the same caste location. So that added to a layer of complexity. Now, starting 1920s, we had what is called the anti-notch movement or the reform movement, by which the entire Devadasi system was questioned, right? But the existence of a woman, an unmarried woman, being ritually dedicated to temple and having a relationship with a rich patron was questioned. And this led to a debate, discussion, and a lot of controversies. And that is what is called the anti-notch movement or the reform movement. And that led to the dying out and abolition of the Devadasi system. And the final nail in the coffin was the Madras 1947 and the abolition of the Devadasi Act. This was in 1947 October, right? But the movement started in 1920s. From 1930s, you would already not see any open ritual dedication easily. But by 1947, it was made illegal. Okay, we will look at the revival. What were the forces driving revival? Who are the forces driving revival in the next session? Any more questions? Hi, Nitya.
Hey, hi. No, I just wanted to say thank you. There were so many things that I did not know. Um, like general history of Devdasis and hereditary dancer aside, I think there are a lot of things that came up that I learned from the session. So it was very interesting for me also to tune in. So thank you.
Thank you. I have all of the notes ready. I'll just send it to you. The pictures also, I will share it. So yeah,
Sure, sure.
I'll
Yeah.
share the pictures, and today's notes, I'll probably send it right away to you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Anybody has any questions, guys? I know it's a lot to
I know
sit
it's
with,
a
so
lot to
even if you
process.
want to sit with it now and then come back with your questions next session, or like let me know and I can ask Maha
We
anytime,
can
that
also,
that also
yeah,
works.
Nitya, just probably put up like a question bank before the class
Yeah,
next one.
that works. I'll do that. That's a good idea. I'll
We
put up a
can just
question bank as well.
we can discuss. And also, one thing I want to let all of you know is the goal of whatever we discuss is not to remember, but to appreciate. Okay, you can get out of this class not remembering any of this. Because going forward, when we get into the details of specifics to our art form, Bharatanatyam itself, if I give you like, oh, this king did this, the job, it's not your job to remember the king's name, the era in which he lived, none of that. But come out with a larger sense of appreciation that, oh my God, the form that I carry today has gone through so much.
Yeah.
And that if you carry that sense, I think our job as teachers is done. I don't think we need to do anything else.
Yeah.
Whatever you do after is like you can do your reading, and that if we've inspired that, that is great. That's all. Okay.
Maha, Sai
Okay.
Shri is asking if you can suggest
Yeah.
any reading
Yeah.
material.
So I will. So the Amrit Srinivasan's article I will send. So this is something else I want to tell all of you. I don't know. See, a lot of you live in the US and you're trained to think like Western academics. So I mean, or you understand Western academics better than I do. So I think you're already better off than I am. But a lot of times I tell this for students in India. Dance history has been studied more in the West, right? So the language they use, like ethnography, anthropology. So early when I started reading, I would like Google every word, and by the end of this, I would forget why I started learning, like reading this article, right? So I often, like at least for students in India, I keep saying this, that you can read anything. A small article in the Hindu carries a lot of value. Don't always go in search of only something very intellectual. All right, I will send you like the best, like Amrit Srinivasan and this kind of work also, because I think you girls are older and you girls are like also best trained to think in the US, so you're already at an advantage. That so you're it's different from where I started, so that's great. But often I think just reading something small from just like very small, and also sometimes you will end up reading wrong things, like wrong information. But at the end of it, to come back and think, okay, that must have been wrong, and to put things together, that joy is also something very interesting, right? Like, oh, this is wrong. That, like, you will make sense of things on your own. So I will send you articles, but if I have also inspired you to sort of read on your own, Google some of this, try to get on that journey on your own, you will be able to appreciate it better. Very often I've noticed if I send in a list of 5, 6 articles, they're lying on our drive, we are not reading. Right? It's not to say I will not send you, but that journey that you will take on your own is much more special. That's all. All right. The other thing is, because a lot of dance history is written in the West, sometimes reading Indian articles is also important, because reading something from India written by an Indian and not from the Western trained eye is important. Also, is something I feel, because end of the day is an Indian art form. And this is something I often find very problematic in dance history is a lot of Western scholarship talks a lot of Chennai, and none of them have lived or danced in Chennai, right? It's very easy for you to be critical about Chennai without having ever interacted with the dancers in Chennai, or without ever having seeing or lived or breathed that scene. Even though Nitya or me may not live in Chennai, our roots of dance are very much there. So we understand the scene better than any of these Western scholars. This is something I strongly feel, right? So it is again very important for you to read something Indian based scholarship also, right? So this is just a suggestion that I have. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mahan. Nritya, you had a question?
No question. I was going to ask about the articles as well. Just
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
I will
wonderful.
send you. I will definitely send you as much reading as I can. Definitely. And most often, a lot of my notes itself will have hyperlinks and all of it. So
Wonderful.
it's done like that. Okay. All right. See
All
you
right.
then. See you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Thank you. See you next month.